All right. Get some of this stuff going here. Hey, if everyone can see me, would you please send me a message that says hello? Wonderful. Hey, everyone. Great to see you. Oh, good, good, good. All right. I fell asleep at my desk for a few minutes today. I had this mark on my forehead, and I'm glad that's gone right now. It's been a lot going on this week. We have finals for our students. All right. Let's see here. I can see everyone, which is good. So today's topic, we're going to be covering Wigger's diagram, but I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes before they come to make sure that they're here. Let's see here. And I have got for a microphone. Good. Okay, good. So I've got that. All right. All right, everyone. Good to see you all. Before I get started here, I'm just going to go slideshow, and I want to go, let's see here. Okay, I don't want to do that. Go like this. Go like this. And then let me see here. I'm just trying to determine how to best. I switched over from my Keynote to PowerPoint right now. And I'm just trying to see if that is going to do any better. Well, the problem with that is now I can't see my slides. So I'm going to go stop sharing for a second, just for a second, everyone. I want to be able to do this so I can see it. Let's see here. The current slide. Oh, yeah. So that's my problem. I can share it, but let's see here. Yeah, sorry, everyone. I know this is not like the funnest thing in the world to watch. I'm just trying to figure out how to show this. All right, and I switched over. Switch displays. No. All right. All right. You can hear that's my son Gabriel. Just kind of funny. Well, yeah, that's the problem. So I have it right now, but I can't see everyone anymore. So Sarush, if you're there by chance, if you've got any advice, if I could do this, so because I want to be able to see all the comments at the same time. And let's see here, speaker view. There's this view. Let's see here. Mm-hmm. Oh, that might work. Hey, can everyone see that? Okay, can you just see where it says Wigger's diagram, but you can see my face? Would that work, everyone? Yes? Oh, hey, fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your patience as you're just sitting here watching me just do the really boring thing. That is wonderful. Okay, Good. Well, I hope everyone's doing well. Let's get started. But before we start into the this stuff, what I got to remember what I did actually to make that thing work. I'm going to do this. Let's take a look at the first question. Okay. So first question is this: the best explanation for what the arrows are demonstrating is what? So this is now review from last week, and I want you to just throw in what your guess is inside the chat feature of what you think the best explanation for what the arrows are demonstrating is. Ventricular. Ta-da! What? I'll give you about 20 seconds. All right, I'm seeing some A's and some C's. All right, so definitely. So what I see is you saying that blood is flowing. Very good. So we did, and I would concur, blood is flowing. And the arrows are showing that going from the atria to the ventricles. So now we got to figure out, is the blood flowing because the ventricles are contracting or because the ventricles are relaxing? So part of that is to see where the blood is flowing from and to. And because the blood is flowing from the atria into the ventricles, the best answer is C as in cat. And that is because when blood goes at the same time, when the atria contract, the ventricles are relaxing, blood flows down into those chambers. Does that make sense? Let's do another one. Thank you, Rachel. ID the heart chamber that supplies the vessel indicated in the lung. So we see that right lung, and the arrow is indicating what heart chamber supplies the vessel in that lung. Everyone just take a second and figure this out. All right, we got some C's and some B's that are in that. I'll just give another second before we continue. All right, so my son. So what we see here is that arrow on the lung is pointing to a vessel, and the vessel's in cross section. The vessel's in cross section, but take a look at the color. It's blue. What does the color blue indicate? Blue indicates deoxygenated blood, or a vessel that's transporting deoxygenated blood. And so the right side of the heart is what supplies the lungs with deoxygenated blood via the pulmonary arteries in order to become oxygenated. And letter C is the chamber that represents the right ventricle in this case, that then brings, we see the right ventricle contracts, blood flows out, and deoxygenated blood flows out through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary arteries, through the pulmonary arteries, A for away from, that go all the way to the lungs into the parenchyma here for gas exchange to occur. Then the red or pink pulmonary veins brings blood back to B, which is showing the left atrium. And that's going into the left atrium. That's where the oxygenated blood comes. Does that make sense? So that's just a little bit of review of stuff from last week, getting us ready for what we're going to cover this week. Okay. So this week we're covering the Wiggers diagram. Now, when you look at this Wiggers diagram, I mean, I sometimes feel like a pig looking at the stars. I see it, but I just don't get it. Or at least that's how I felt when I first looked at Wigger's diagram. Like, look at how much stuff is going on with this. Carl Wiggers was a cardiac physiologist from the early 1900s, and he did a lot of great research with heart. And one of the things he did was he helped us see numerous single events that occur during the cardiac cycle, and then he graphed them in one place. And it is in my now that I understand, I look at this, I think it's like a work of art. Now, to better understand it, I'm going to use a process called chunking, where we take a complex picture like this and put it into chunks like that. Okay, we're going to take a look at a chunk like this. This one chunk, okay, and then this chunk. I'm doing this, my clicker's not working. I'm going to try this place over here. See if my clicker will work. I'm having some technical problems today. And here we've got now the y-axis is showing pressure, which is 0 to 120 millimeters of mercury pressure. That means it takes, for the amount of pressure it takes to raise a column of mercury a certain level. And so this is showing on the y-axis that, and on the x-axis it's showing time in millimeters per second along that. Okay, and then I'm going to show three things that I've shown in a blue dash line, a black dash line, and a red solid line. So that's what we're going to focus on first. So here's the first question. Match the following three structures with their associated letter below. Okay, so we have ABC, and which of those map to the aorta, left atrium, and left ventricle? Because these lines show the pressure, and that's the key. Remember, the y-axis shows the pressure. So let's take a look at A. So the left axis is showing this pressure, and the x-axis is showing over a series of time. Now take a look at A. That blue dash line, it's high. It's always above 80 millimeters of mercury pressure. And at some places, like take a look right here, it goes up to 120 millimeters of mercury pressure. So on the low end, 80 throughout the cardiac cycle, but on the high end, 120. What does that? Well, arteries do that. You know that because you go to the doctors and they take your blood pressure and they're like, oh, your blood pressure is 120 over 80. So what is the blood vessel here? The aorta. So the aorta is showing the blue dashed line indicates the pressure in millimeters of mercury across and through time, that it goes from low to high. Let's take a look now at C as in cat. It's the low one. So if the aorta was high, we take a look in the low one. And so that is down in the almost to zero, but it doesn't really get more than 20 millimeters of mercury. So we're like at 5 millimeters of mercury pressure on the high end to 20 millimeters of mercury pressure. It's not a lot. And what does that? Well, ventricles don't do that. Ventricles go really high at times. So C is showing the left atrium. That's the pressure in the left atrium. Okay. Again, over time. So that means by process of elimination, B must be the left ventricle. And that makes sense because it's going to have pressure that is below left atrium in order to receive the oxygenated blood from the left atrium. But the pressure must get to a point that it exceeds or gets higher than the aorta. Does that make sense? So there we have those three elements. Just those three parts of the Wigger's diagram that we have labeled. Okay. And I actually see, yes, Anjali, thank you for putting that left atrium in. I just saw that. All right. Now, next concept. Here, what I've done is I've placed letters and arrows for A, B, C, and D, where the lines cross each other. Where at letter A, the red line and black dotted line cross, in B, the red and the blue dotted line cross, and so forth. So here's the next question. Match the event with the associated letter on the diagram. Woo! Okay, so now we revisit pictures from last week, which is a superior view of the heart. The atria have been removed, but we see valves open and closed. All right. So let's take a look and do this one at a time. So let's take a look at letter A, shall we? Now, what's happening at letter A? Well, what we see is that right at that moment where the green arrow is showing A, the red line has greater pressure than the black dotted line. So when the left ventricular pressure, red, is greater than the left atrial pressure in the dotted line, what happens? So let's now go to this picture. Which of these pictures show that? Well, when that left ventricle starts squeezing, it slams the mitral valve shut. And oh, I love what you put there. It is the start of systole. You're spot on. That green arrow at letter A is indicating the beginning of systole. That is S1. That's what's happening at A, or lub from lub-dub. So which of these pictures shows that? Well, it must show the mitral valve, but the mitral valve should be closed, which is what that picture shows. There's the mitral valve, and you see that it's shut. And so here we have this picture now that now is a coronal section, and notice that right here, that left ventricle, when the wall starts squeezing, blood pressure slams this mitral valve shut. Now, what keeps it shut and stopping it from shing, doing that and prolapsing? That's the chordae tendineae with contraction of the papillary muscles. Okay. We okay with that? That was fun. Let's do another one. So now let's take a look at what happens in B. Now at B, we see the red line, left ventricular pressure, exceeding that of aortic pressure. So when that happens, which valve is affected? Well, the valve between the left ventricle and the aorta is the aortic valve. Now, will the aortic valve open or will it close? And if left ventricular pressure becomes greater than aortic pressure, then shing, that aortic valve is going to open. Yes, Anjali, yes, it's going to open. Why? As I mentioned last week, blood does not have a brain. Blood does not know it's supposed to go in a direction. Blood simply moves based upon pressure gradients when pressure goes from high to low. Okay, so when the left ventricle squeezes and the pressure in the left ventricle is greater than the aorta, that's when blood goes out. And you think, well, why doesn't blood go back into the left atrium? Well, that's because this mitral valve is shut. Chordae tendineae papillary muscles are keeping that shut. So blood is shunted, opens the aortic valve, and enters inside the aorta. Okay. Now, what about C as in cat? So we take a look. The left ventricular pressure now descends and goes and is now, the pressure in the left ventricle is now below the pressure in the aorta because the left ventricle starts to relax. And when left ventricular pressure becomes lower than aortic pressure, what valve is going to be affected? Well, what's the valve between the left ventricle and aorta? Again, it's the aortic valve. And because now pressure is greater in the aorta than it is in the left ventricle, shing, that's what happens. Yes, very good, you guys. It's going to close. And it closes simply because blood backflows and closes it. So in this picture, you see blood goes back, slams this valve shut, and it makes a sound. And what do we call that? S2 or dub. Yes, Anjali, well done. And there's that sound going to make, okay? Now, finally, we conclude with the letter D, as in delta. Yes, good. Notice now left ventricular pressure descends below left atrial pressure. So when left atrial pressure is greater than left ventricular pressure, what valve is going to be affected? Well, what's the valve between the left atrium and left ventricle? It's the mitral valve. And in this case, which picture shows the opening of the mitral valve? That one does. The mitral valve opens simply because left atrial pressure now is greater than, and you see that. Take a look. Right at this line, left atrial pressure, the black dotted line, is greater than pressure in the left ventricle, the red solid line. So all in this area, we have filling during diastole that is occurring. Okay? Just like that. Left atrium, blood is now flowing into the left ventricle. All right. So there is now the picture. We have now covered pressures in the left atrium, left ventricle, and aorta. We've covered the opening and closing of the mitral and aortic valves. This is only showing the left side of the heart. It is only this, the Wigger's diagram focuses only on left atrium, left ventricle, and aorta. That's the only side that it focuses on for this pressure part, okay? Now, the same thing is happening on the right side of the heart. The only difference is the pressures are a lot lower, okay? All right. I wondered if there's any questions. If anyone's got any questions they'd like to stick in the chat. All right. Next. You guess what time it is? It's time for a question. So the time frame indicated by the yellow arrow shows that the left ventricle is what? And I'm going to give you all about 30 seconds. And I'll play some background music while you're doing that for about 30 seconds. And then I want you to put your answer in the chat. Does that sound good? I think I got it. There we go. That's a little bit better. Okay, so I see some people putting, keep going, you guys. You're doing great. Let's see here. Okay. Put my stand a bit closer. All right. B, is it right? Is it right before complete contraction of the ventricle? Okay, good, good, good. All right, so I've got B's, C's, A's, B's, and some questions. All right, let's go through this, shall we? Thank you, everyone, for participating. Now we see the time frame. I don't have the x-axis labeled, but we know time is the factor. The yellow arrow is showing an instance that's occurring here during this space, okay? Now, what we're trying to determine is the left ventricle contracting or is it relaxed? Now, if we take a look at what's occurring in this red line, what is happening to the pressure in the left ventricle? Is it going... oh, I've got some great, look, great comments in here. Yes, the left ventricle is contracting, but flowing, question mark. And then Paramjot said it's rising, and it is. And we see this. Take a look. The red line is going from low to high. So we know the pressure is going up. And what is the only way we can make that pressure go up? That left ventricle has to squeeze. It's got to contract. Does that make sense? So we know it has to be A or B. But now we got to figure out, if the blood is flowing or not flowing. Well, if the mitral valve is closed down here and the aortic valve opens here, we're in between that. The aortic valve is closed, and at this point, the mitral and aortic valves are closed. So as Nabil said, the aortic valve is not open yet. So the blue line of the aortic pressure is still decreasing. So yes, so what we see is the left ventricle is contracted and blood is not flowing. Oh, this is really cool. How can we have the left ventricle contracting but blood is not flowing? We call this isovolume contraction. How does this work? So let's take a look at this. So during diastole, okay, at number 1, let's go down here for a second. Number 1, during diastole, the left ventricle, red line, relaxes and it fills with blood. So the left atrial pressure, the black dotted line, is higher than left ventricle. So left ventricle fills with blood. And then we come back over here. So as I go along here and I stop, I now, because it's a cycle, go over here and it continue that line, okay? So now what we see is systole starts occurring. That left ventricle contracts right at number 2. Bam! You see that red line start getting bigger. And the left ventricle contracts, pressure closes the mitral valve at 2, slams the mitral valve shut. But the pressure's not enough to open the aortic valve yet. So this is the really cool thing about Wigger's diagram. What it shows is we need to go in the left ventricle from a very low pressure system, like what the lungs are in, that the left atrium has. But then we need to get the blood higher pressure than what's in the arteries, which the aorta is a very high pressure system. So there's this moment when the left ventricle slams that mitral valve shut, that the left ventricle keeps squeezing and increasing pressure, but the blood doesn't flow. And it's not a very long time. Iso means the same volume. A liquid is non-compressible. You cannot make liquid smaller, but you can squeeze on it. And so what we see is at number 2, the left ventricle contracts, pressure closes the mitral valve, but not enough pressure yet to open the aortic valve. There's a short time where both valves are shut, isovolumetric contraction, until we get to the number 3, where the left ventricles continue to contract until left ventricular pressure is greater than aortic pressure, then the aortic valve opens. But where the yellow line is in between. Does that make sense? Questions on that before continuing? Anyone have any questions in the chat? All right. Now, I'm going to chunk and add one more facet of the Wigger's diagram to this picture. I'm adding now left ventricular volume. So this top part is showing pressure in the y-axis and time in the x-axis. This next part of the Wigger's diagram, I'm going to add left ventricular volume in milliliters in the y-axis in the same time frame in the x-axis. So what happens is you see right in this phase, the volume has not changed. And it is not until the aortic valve opens at number 3 that we lose or decrease the volume in the left ventricle. Why? Because the volume of blood is moving from the left ventricle into the aorta until the aortic valve closes, and then the mitral valve opens, and now blood starts flowing in to the left ventricle. Oh, this is where the Wigger's diagram is amazing. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to show here, I just wanted to show that if you have isovolumetric contraction, you also get a process called isovolumetric relaxation, where at this area, when the aortic valve closes, but pressure in the left ventricle is still greater than the pressure in the left atrium, then there's this moment in time where the left ventricle is relaxing, but blood's still not flowing. So during number 1, what this number 1 shows is the left ventricle begins to relax. It's the beginning of diastole. left ventricular pressure is less than aortic pressure, so the aortic valve closes, dub, but the left ventricular pressure is still greater than left atrial pressure, therefore no blood is flowing. But then we get down at number 2. Diastole continues. The left ventricle continues to relax, but now at number 2, the left ventricular pressure is less than left atrial pressure. So the mitral valve opens, shing, and blood flows from the left atrium to the left ventricle. All right. So we had, who said this earlier? IL-1 alluded to this. Is that where the dicrotic, let's see here. Oh, I'm just got some questions here I missed. Okay, let me see here. Nabil, the aortic valve is not open. Okay, good. Samir, is that where that dicrotic notch occurs right at the onset of isovolumetric relaxation? Yes, Samir, that is correct. This right here is called the dicrotic notch. Right there. Can you see my arrow? Because what happens is the following. When the left ventricular pressure descends below aortic pressure, blood flow backs up and slams those valves shut, okay? And what happens is it's usually that's where the sensor is, and this dicrotic notch varies because usually it's this backflow of blood that causes that little dicrotic notch. So yes, good question. Now, where do systole and diastole occur? I want you to just take the next 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. And I want you to try to determine in this picture where systole and where diastole occur on this, okay? I don't know what I'm playing. I'm just messing around right here. Okay, so now let's determine, now that you've had a chance to look at this, systole begins at S1 and ends at S2. So where's S1 and S2 in this picture? There's S1 and there's S2. So this dotted line that S1 is showing is pressure in the left ventricle, the red line, exceeds pressure in the left atrium, black dashed line, due to left ventricular contraction, thus closing the mitral valve. Now, when we take a look at S2, the pressure in the left ventricle, the red line, drops below aortic pressure, the blue dashed line, due to left ventricular relaxation, thus closing the aortic valve. So systole is between S1 and S2. And diastole is between S2 and S1. And you'll notice that diastole is longer. It's actually twice as long than systole. In other words, when your heart contracts and then it relaxes, relaxation is twice as long. So I kind of think of your one heart cycle like a 24-hour period. And some were to say, hey, how much time do you work? Well, your workday is 8 hours. And then you relax for the other 16. You go home and you relax for 8 hours and you sleep for 8 hours. And that's like the heart. The heart works for 1/3 of the cardiac cycle, systole, and then it relaxes for the other 2/3 during diastole. All right. So now let's add the whole thing for a second. So here we've got, now take a look at the top. We have got at the very top, the left vertical line, the y-axis is the pressure in millimeters of mercury pressure with the x-axis in time. We have the left atrium, left ventricle, and aorta indicated with the with the 2 valves and the 4 different modes of open or close. We then have the next one where the y-axis is showing ventricular volume and the volume in the left ventricle. Then we have aortic flow rate, Heart sounds, S1 and S2. And then we've just added the EKG at the bottom as well. Is that not the most beautiful thing? Now that we've chunked it and you have a chance to take a look at it a little bit more, that in green is systole. That's what we see. And what is systole? Well, it's where the mitral valve closes, between the mitral valve closing and the aortic valve closing. It's during systole is when blood is pumped out of the left ventricle, which is why the volume goes down. Where's the blood go? Into the aorta, which is why the flow rate goes up. The heart sound is between the closing of the mitral valve, S1, and the closing of the, and then the aortic valve closing in S2. And it's caused by, in the EKG, the QRS complex is an electrical event that precedes the mechanical event, which is ventricular contraction. And we see that this electrical event, depolarization of the left ventricle, causes this systole to occur. It's beautiful. And that means the rest in orange is diastole. Okay? Systole, diastole. Okay, now, in cardiac physiology, the end diastolic volume, or EDV, is the volume of blood in the left ventricle at the end of diastole, or volume of blood in the left ventricle just before systole occurs. Identify the letter A, B, C, D, or E that indicates end diastolic volume. And I want you to take the next 30 seconds and choose the letter you think that is. Okay? 30 seconds. And then I'd like you to put your throw up your hypothesis in the live chat, okay, of what letter represents end diastolic volume. All right, so I see a number of people putting D as in door. Well, let's think this out. Let's see. So, end diastolic volume, volume of blood in the left ventricle at the very end of diastole, or how much blood's in that left ventricle just before contraction occurs. So let's take a look at this. What is the beginning of diastole or the end of systole? Well, that's S1. Okay. So let's see where that is. Dun, dun, dun. All right. So diastole starts at this part right here, and it goes all the way to D. So systole is right at D. That's the beginning of systole, or the very end of diastole, and that is the only letter that shows it. So I agree. D is the best answer for this. Oh, well done, everyone. That's fantastic. So when we now take a look at this, we have pressure and volume that, whoa, didn't mean to do that. So what we see is, and end diastolic volume is the volume of blood inside the left ventricle right before systole occurs. Then why is the volume still the same? If systole is occurring at this vertical line, why is the volume not change? Because that's the isovolumetric contraction phase where the left ventricle is contracting, but the volume hasn't changed. My son is playing with our dog. I don't know if you can hear this or not, but he's in the other room. Okay. That's end diastolic volume. So end diastolic volume, EDV, the volume of blood in the left ventricle at the end of diastole or just before systole, that yellow arrow. Now, what is end systolic volume, or ESV? It's the volume of blood in the left ventricle at the end of systole, or just before diastole, and that's what's showing the purple arrow. So basically, shing, we get down here. This is where the volume of blood that's in the left ventricle, right at the end of ventricular contraction. Now, I want you to notice something. What is end systolic volume? What is it? Like, what is the value? Someone tell me, put in the chat, live chat, what is end systolic volume? Yes, Anjali, exactly. It's 50 milliliters. And it goes up to 130 milliliters. What you may notice, you never completely empty the ventricle. So it's not like you go squeeze and it's like pouring a cup of water and it's all gone, and then you fill it back up. There's always a volume of blood inside that ventricle. Okay? We don't eject the whole kit and caboodle. Yes, that is exactly right. We do not eject the whole kit and caboodle. I'm going to close my blinds because it looks like I'm going to have a vision here in a minute. All right. Well said. Okay. Identify the letter that most likely indicates the event occurring at the time frame indicated by the yellow arrow. Okay. So take a look at A through H. I'm going to give you about 40 seconds, and I want you to throw up your hypothesis in the chat. Okay. Letter that indicates the event occurring at the time frame indicated by the yellow arrow. Okay. And go. About 15 more seconds. All right, so I see 3 votes so far on this. Contracted G. Got you. Okay, yeah, good. Thank you. Seeing some more votes going up in here. Orchid, is that G? We're almost about to contract. Okay, thank you. Great comments, everyone. All right, great comments. All right, thank you, everyone. This is fantastic. All right, now let's go through this and figure out what's going on. All right. So this yellow arrow shows this dotted line that goes up inside here. See, why not? Question mark. So what we see is we have left ventricular pressure is definitely going up. When we take a look at this moment down here with the black dotted line and the red line, we see that the left ventricular volume is going up. So what is occurring at this space? Well, the mitral valve is closing. Okay, so we cannot say B because the mitral valve is closed and does not open till down over here. Now we see up here where the red line, left ventricular pressure, gets greater than aortic pressure. So that's where the aortic valve opens. So it's not A because we're not there yet in time. We haven't got there yet. Okay. Now, what about, seeing some people say P wave of the EKG? Well, the P wave of an EKG, if you don't remember this, that's the electrical, it represents the action potential spreading through the atrial muscles to cause it to contract. That occurs before this bump. This is the atrial kick at the end of diastole. So the P wave is over here. So it's not that either. So what is going on? And it's not ventricular diastole, as in D, because the ventricle is contracting, as evidenced by the increasing red line. And it's not atrial systole, because that's what preceded this. So what is happening? Well, we definitely are going to be between E and F. Either the left ventricular volume is at end diastolic volume or it's at the end of end systolic volume. Now, we are at the beginning of systole. You see how I did a dramatic pause there? We're at the beginning of systole, but blood's not flowing. So this is left ventricular volume is at end diastolic volume. So because what we see is in this time frame, blood's not flowing. So the amount of blood that was in that left ventricle at the end of diastole is still in that left ventricle. It hasn't gone anywhere. Now the left ventricle is contracting, but the volume of blood has not gone anywhere. It's still in there because the aortic valve has not opened yet. So end systolic volume won't occur until that aortic valve shuts. And then we start descending. That's when we have the end systolic volume. Does that make sense? Any thoughts, questions, muddy points that you want to stick in the live chat? Thank you, Paramjot. Thank you. Any questions or comments in there you'd like to throw up? All right. The thing about Wigger's diagram that's interesting is clinicians don't use this. Clinicians use EKGs. Clinicians use blood pressure, but it's not like they sit there and say, well, Mrs. Jones, as I sit down with your, your labs from your blood test and your chest x-ray and your Wigger's diagram, they don't do that. But understanding the Wigger's diagram is critical in understanding the functionality of the heart. So even though clinicians don't use the Wigger's diagram in treating patients, every clinician, every cardiologist especially, knows all the information in Wigger's diagram because that's how you gain a better understanding. That is how you gain an understanding about the cardiac cycle and the functionality of the heart. So there in green is the isovolumetric contraction. So when we take a look, the pressure is increasing, but the volume has not changed, and neither has the aortic flow rate because blood's not flowing yet until that aortic valve opens. I just have a clarifying question. So the AV valve is still closed at that previous question. In this question, Anjali, in this question, yes, that mitral valve is still closed. And why is it still closed? Because the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles are pulling down to make sure that that mitral valve doesn't slam open. So as long as pressure in the left ventricle is greater than pressure in the left atrium, that mitral valve is shut, it's closed, and is preventing blood from regurgitating or going backwards from left ventricle to left atrium. Does that help, Anjali? Good question. You're most welcome. Isovolumetric contraction. All right. Oh, okay. Here's another question. All right. Determine the stroke volume of this patient. David, what stroke volume? I'll tell you what stroke volume is. Stroke volume is the difference between the end diastolic and end systolic volumes. In other words, stroke volume is the volume of blood ejected with each heartbeat. So I want you to take a look at this picture and take the next 30 seconds and calculate stroke volume. You got 30 seconds. Go. Okay, another 10 seconds. was a little Simon and Garfunkel. Went from Led Zeppelin to Simon and Garfunkel. All right. So I see 5 of you said 80. So one of you said 60. All good. Good. Thank you. Anyone else want to put up before we go through? I'm going to tell you why I do this. And I ask you to 2 things. Ask you to think through questions and give you time, because what the literature, the data show about understanding and retention of knowledge is the more we struggle to determine an answer, even if it were wrong, the more you struggle to determine an answer by trying to recall a memory, the easier it is to find that memory the next time. That's what's beautiful, even if you're not correct. And there's something about committing to an answer by typing it in the chat feature, write it in on a piece of paper. It's called the testing effect, that when you commit to an answer, you further solidify the ability to gain that piece of information again. So I continually encourage students. This is why I do this, why I pose a question, give you a chance to think about it. Okay. So where is the end diastolic volume? Well, end diastolic volume is this volume right here. It's the very end of diastole. Where's diastole? It ends right before S1. And where's end systolic volume? It's down here, right at the beginning of diastole. So 130 minus 50 is 80. There we have it. End diastolic volume is 130 millimeters of mercury pressure, 130 milliliters of blood. End systolic volume at the end of systole is 50 milliliters of blood. So that means when the heart goes and contracts, how much blood entered the aorta? 80 milliliters of blood entered the aorta after that heartbeat. And they call it the cardiac cycle because what happens is you just do it again. So everything you see here, it just keeps repeating. Hence why it's called the cardiac cycle. Questions and comments about that one? All right. Let's end with talking about pressure volume loops. So in this one, the y-axis continues to be continues to be pressure, but specifically, we're only looking at the left ventricle. We are no longer at this point in a PV loop, pressure volume loop. We're no longer considering aorta and no longer considering left atrium. We are only considering the pressure in the left ventricle. The x-axis is now volume of blood in the left ventricle. From 0 to 130 milliliters is what I have in this one, okay? So a pressure volume loop is pressure and volume, pressure of blood and volume of blood in the left ventricle. And it looks like this. That's what the pressure volume loop looks like. What I want you now to do is to identify the letter that best indicates the direction of blood flow in a PV loop. All 4 of these pictures, I didn't put A, B, C, or D, blast. So I want you to just take the next 15 seconds as the top left, top right, bottom right, and determine which one shows the arrows of the direction that blood is flowing. Take about 15 seconds. We only have a few minutes left. I promise we'll finish in the next 5. And Jolly is saying bottom left. Because of time, let's take a look at that. So what Anjali's showing is that down here, blood in the left ventricle is increasing in volume. But then we hit a part. So the volume is increasing. Then we hit a point where the pressure goes up. But did any of the volume change? No. Volume stayed the same for this little area. And then look, we lose volume in the left ventricle till we get to a point where our volume stays the same, but the pressure drops until we get to the point in which we do it again. And so we see Anjali, Nabil, and Amy, you're all spot on. The bottom left is showing this loop pattern. And it is beautiful, okay? What it shows. Now, what I want you to do is to take a look and say, I want you now to identify the valve indicated by the yellow arrow and its state. At that point, is the mitral valve or aortic valve, they're the 2 valves we're looking at, is the yellow arrow showing the aortic or mitral valve, And is that valve opened or closed? Oh, look at Nabil and Anjali. Aortic valve open. Oh, it's open. Look. Oh, you all jumping into this. Let's take a look at this. Well, if we then have left ventricular volume at a high, say it's about 120 milliliters, and the volume is not changed, but look, we got this huge increase of pressure until that aortic valve opens, and now look what happens. The volume is decreasing. Where's the blood going? That blood is now leaving the left ventricle and is entering the aorta until the pressure gets to a point when the aortic valve closes and you have isovolumetric relaxation. Is this not the most beautiful thing? That we now see this cycle in the bottom left corner, the mitral valve opens. So when the mitral valve opens, blood flows in. So the volume of blood in the left ventricle increases until the pressure gets up just enough that the pressure in the left ventricle is greater than the left atrium, but then the left ventricle keeps squeezing. So blood cannot flow into the left atrium, but the pressure is still not great enough to enter the aorta. So the pressure increases until that aortic valve opens, and then blood exits into the aorta. So the volume decreases until we hit a pressure that is below aortic valve, and then the aortic valve closes. Okay. I'm going to skip this one. Yeah, this is kind of cool. So that arrow is showing the isovolumetric relaxation. You notice that in the vertical line, the volume has not changed, but the pressure has. And notice that this is a straight line, but take a look in isovolumetric relaxation. This is a line at an angle. What's the deal? So why is the isovolumetric relaxation vertical in a PV loop, but it's a slope in the Wiggers diagram? And the answer to this is as follows. The x-axis in the PV loop and the y-axis. So basically what happens is the x-axis is volume in a PV loop and the x-axis in the Wiggers is time. Time is not measured or indicated. Okay. Let's end with this one. What is diastole? Okay, so let's finish with this. What is diastole based on this PV loop? Everyone take the next 30 seconds. We'll end with this one. Okay, so many of you are saying, let's see here, A through D, or three A, C, C. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All wonderful. Yes, so you know that at letter A, there's the left ventricular pressure is dropping, right? So you know that A through C definitely has to be it, but to C through D, yeah, so A through C is showing isovolumetric relaxation, but C to D is diastolic filling. So the correct answer is Roman numeral 3, or A to C to D. Oh, that's fantastic, everyone. Well done. Well done. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. There. Okay, cool. Let me go escape from that. So, hey, that was awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. I wondered if you had any last questions that you wanted to stick in the chat on some of the stuff that we just covered. Covered a lot, you know. This is fun. Alan, thank you. And Jali, thank you. I'm glad. I really enjoyed that. And this stuff is so critical in really understanding how heart physiology works. And I hope you never look at the Wiggers diagram. I hope that came up. Let me say that again. I hope when you look at the Wiggers diagram it is now a more appreciation of what it demonstrates. Rachel, thank you very much. You're a great student. All right. So I'll leave it at that. So we're gonna get to, you're most welcome, Nabil and Amy. We're gonna get together next Thursday. I have currently arteries and veins down as the topic. I think that's what I'm gonna stick to. And then the next week, but I may change and add a few more things to next Thursday. But that's what we have thus far. Thanks so much, everyone. It is always a pleasure. I wish you all the best week, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much. Cheers. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Sandra and Paramjot and Nabil, KK. Wonderful. All right. Orchid, will you do splanchnic stuff? Splanchnic stuff with the heart, like cardiopulmonary splanchnics, or splanchnic stuff like greater splanchnic, lesser, least, lumbar, sacral, pelvic splanchnics? The second one, like cardiopulmonary splanchnics. What I will do is I'm going to talk about the cardiac splanchnic nerves that come. And then Nabil says, can we do fetal circulation heart embryo? If you want, that's when Nabil, one of the things. So let me finish the splanchnic one first. In 2 weeks, I'm covering action potentials, how action potentials spread through heart muscle cells, the contractile cells, and the conduction cells, like the SA and AV nodes. And I talk about cardiac splanchnic nerves with that. Now, the fetal circulation heart embryo, Nabil, that's what I'm actually toying with changing to next Thursday, because I figure we're staying with the heart theme. We did heart anatomy. Today we did heart physiology. Next 2 weeks we do heart electrical physiology. So maybe what I might do is next Thursday is do fetal circulation and heart embryo. I will be honest, heart embryology is not, like embryology in general is not my strength. When I take a look at the 4 anatomical, actually, if I take a look at gross anatomy, microscopic anatomy, embryology, neuro, and phys, embryo is probably my weakest, but I teach the heart, embryo, and fetal circulation in our curriculum, so I'm better at that one. So I may do that next Thursday. Any other questions? All right, that's it. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.